You're being modest.
Well, I was good enough to run in college, etc. But the point being is that doesn't always matter. Okay? That doesn't really matter. And I think it was easy for me to kind of try to impart that philosophy because, one, I think I've understood that. But as I've talked about with my dad in the past years, great people don't always even have to finish what they start. I think it's just that you get to the starting line, that you're willing to put yourself out there. When I joined the track team at UC Davis, I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I just walked on and I said, Coach D, I want to try out for the track team. And she said, okay, the tryout's 3 months long, and see how you do. So I'm like, all right. And in January, there was a tryout, there was a time trial for the 400 meters. And she said the top 3 people will travel to the Reno invite. I'm like, okay, no problem. I was like seated last out of like 7 guys. For some strange reason, I finished 3rd. So I got to travel. And I knew that Coach was not expecting me to make it because when I checked the entry forms, which were posted in our hotel room, the fastest guy on our team who hurt himself in the time trial, his name was crossed off and my name was written above his. And I was in the fastest heat, and I shouldn't have been in the fastest heat. Well, I finished not too well in that race. And after the indoor season, you turn in your uniform because then the outdoor season started. Well, when I got my new uniform issued, I got a JV uniform because in college we had 2 different uniforms. Do you remember this?
Yes.
So I'm like, oh, this is no good. Well, when the traveling team for outdoor season was posted, I wasn't on it. I was like, okay, so what do I do? And I talked to Coach, and she said, well, we're not taking you because you're not the top 3 hurdlers. But if you want to compete in the meet, you can drive yourself.
Oh.
So I'm like, okay, I'll drive myself. So I found a couple other guys who were in the same boat as me. We drove to Turlock, which is where Cal State Stanislaus was. So we show up. Everyone's like, what are you guys doing here? We're like, well, we're going to run. And I showed up. I ran probably one of the worst races I had that year. But there was another guy who ran probably one of the worst races of his life. And I beat him by 0.05 of a second.
All right.
And so the next week, I was on the traveling squad. And I stayed on the traveling squad for pretty much the rest of my life. But the point was, if you give up right away, you don't know what you miss. Because right away I was like, well, this sucks. The coach cut me already. I didn't even have a chance. She's like, you're not on the team. And I said, okay, well, I'll just swallow my pride and go for it. The point is, if you are nervous about taking a risk, you probably don't know what you're going to miss. Now, that could be life. That could be a whole bunch of different situations, but it could easily be tomorrow, right? If you're nervous about taking a risk, you're nervous about making a move in a race, well, you won't know what happens unless you do it. Now, clearly, Orlando and I have come to an agreement that during the distance races, I will not talk about strategy. So I will just cheer. So I'm not going to try to ruin the distance runner's strategy by just running whatever pace you feel like.
about my arms, though. That helps.
Well, no, that's breaking the Orlando Shuttleworth pact. But anyway.
Then you have to.
But if I look back on my running career, the point sometimes is you have to figure out what your own goals are. As Carlos pointed out, and it's hard to believe that Carlos would say this as one of our fastest athletes, that he's not interested in time. But sometimes I think using time or distance to measure your success is very limiting. Because then that means that every race you have is somewhat disappointing. Because you're never going to run every race a PR. I don't think that's really possible. Maybe these guys, I don't know. So the point is, you need to find your avenue for happiness and how you gauge success. Because you gauge success, we don't. You do. And again, I've told this story before, but I think it's probably my favorite story, and I'll make it really quick. My dad 3 times attempted to run the Western States 100, which is a race from Squaw Valley to Auburn. You do it in one day.
Your shirt.
Yeah, this shirt. And my dad got altitude sickness every year because you go over an 8,000-foot summit, and he would get sick and he would never recover. But he would make it super far into the race, and he was just a mess. And when you see your father in that kind of situation, it's really touching, and you really notice it. And I remember we walked out of 40 miles, and there was a cutoff that was about to happen.